Everyone. I'm Joan Ferrini-Mundy, the president of the University of Maine and our regional campus, the University of Maine at Machias. It's a delight to be with you all today and to introduce a panel and to have a discussion with some of the most distinguished and outstanding faculty in the University of Maine system. And we're very proud that they are here at the University of Maine and at UMaine Machias. This is an extraordinarily challenging and difficult time for higher education. We, of course, for several weeks have been fighting a pandemic worldwide, and there have been implications of that for us for sure on our campuses here in Machias and in Orono. We have managed to move our instruction to an online kind of situation very rapidly, and we're going to hear today from some of the experts in teaching and learning on our campuses who have thought hard about what that looks like and how that works. We also have the very tragic death of George Floyd to recognize at this moment, another worldwide piece of news that is troubling and distressing and disturbing, and that has its own implications for how we manage ourselves going forward in the world and in higher education. And so we have today just a wonderful and expert group of people who are going to share a few thoughts. Each of them will speak briefly, and then we'll go into a discussion with some Q&A to follow that. So I'll introduce each person in sequence. They'll make their remarks, and then I'll introduce the next one, and we'll go on. So I would like to begin with Douglas Allen, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of Maine. And Doug is the winner of the Steve Gould Award. This award recognizes superior qualities of unselfishness and compassion in the course of service to the university and to its ideals. The materials nominating Professor Allen provide an extraordinary picture of this remarkable member of our faculty, and they say the following: consistent remarks on his long-standing commitment to peace and justice activism, combined with accounts of his investment in the campus community and compassion for students, are more substantiation than is needed, but combined with his many achievements, founder of the Peace and Justice Center of Eastern Maine, the Maine Peace Action Committee, and so many others, have led the committee to, with a substantial majority, recommend Professor Allen for this award without hesitation. So, Professor Allen, congratulations, such a well-deserved honor, and we'd love to hear some comments from you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now, fine, thank you. Okay, thanks.
Okay, good. So I was asked if I could present for some insights about my work, and I've been very grateful. I was hired as a professor of philosophy in 1974 at the University of Maine. I'm now completing 46 years. And so it's been a wonderful career here, and I've been very grateful for the opportunity to do such meaningful work in my teaching, my research, and my service. In terms of my three areas of kind of specialized leadership here, and globally, there are three areas. One is the phenomenology of religion. Especially, I knew and worked with Mircea Eliade, who was often considered the most influential scholar of religion in the world, and did a lot of work on the nature of experience, religious experience, myth, symbolism, and how that can inform the world in which we're living today. A second area was in Asian and comparative philosophy. I've spent more than 4 years in India and did a lot of work on Hinduism, Buddhism, comparative East-West philosophy, which again, for me is very meaningful in what's happening in the world today. And the third area is the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, which I've specialized on since at least 1995. Gandhi, often considered the most admired and influential proponent of nonviolence in the world, that we so desperately need today. So I feel very grateful because in terms of my own work, it's been value-based in terms of I've been allowed to write many books and articles. And this has informed, it's been consistent with my own personal values and also my peace and justice work, and even how I relate to the murder of George Floyd just this past week. I was asked, I'll just say a few words about thoughts about higher education. I'll say my main concern there has been the devaluing and marginalization of philosophy, history, literature, the arts, and other areas of the humanities, with the important emphasis on the STEM areas, but often under devaluing what we in the humanities can contribute, not only to basic questions about what it is to be human and live a meaningful life, but also what we can contribute for the understanding of scientists, engineers, people working in nursing, in climate change, where we can contribute a lot to allow them, in fact, to be better scientists and engineers. Finally, just one last word on the Gould Award, for which I'm very grateful. And what it informs is the kind of leadership qualities that I see in students who I hope will become exemplary models of compassion, of kindness, of concern for justice, furthering the well-being of all, and how to live a kind of meaningful, nonviolent, more truthful lives. And really, not just of leaders, but it's of education. To me, those are the qualities we should develop in all of our students. And when we don't, in fact, education is really miseducation, and it leads to very dangerous consequences, even for life and sustainability and survival on this planet. So thank you for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you so much, Doug. So much that I'd like to come back to in that. In particular, how do our values help us now as we guide ourselves into the sort of living with a pandemic kind of education? So we'll come back to it for sure. I'd like to next introduce Sara Lindsay. There she is, okay. Sara Lindsay, who is an associate professor of marine sciences and this year's awardee of the Presidential Outstanding Teaching Award. Again, the nomination materials, just incredible accolades for you, Sara, about your impact and your effect. But there was one that stood out to me, a quote from a former student that I'd like to read, which is this. He said, "When I reflect on the ways of describing Sara's advising and mentoring styles, the word that bubbles to the top is partnership. I know she valued my ideas and input, and I valued hers." And I was just struck by this concept of teaching as partnership, the notion that it's about meeting each other where you are and moving forward from there. And so, Sara, I'm happy to introduce you, and let's hear your remarks, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm very honored to have been recognized by this award. And I will also admit that you just completely threw off what I thought I might say. So here
flexibility is important in teaching too.
Flexibility is very important. And that notion of partnership was an idea that I've been talking about with my colleagues around the nation. And I think I'll do my best to follow up and maybe shape some of what I had in mind to that concept. So, it was an interesting spring. And those of you who were teaching had to become learners again. I think many of us became partners in learning with our students. So at the same time as our students were trying to learn content and how to navigate being in an online teaching environment, so were we learning all kinds of new lingo like Kaltura and Zoom. And for me, I had to learn Blackboard and how to navigate just simple things like sharing information about what marine animals do with a whole bunch of students that I couldn't do in person. So that was a challenge. And we weren't just learning content and skills that were associated with our discipline. We were learning a new way of working together. And I think one of the things that I found the most helpful in the transition that was so abrupt this spring in both of my classes, I had a freshman class and I had a graduate student class, and totally different ends of the spectrum. But what worked well for us in both those cases was making time at the beginning of the transition and throughout the semester to check in and to find out how our students were doing, and to share, quite honestly, how was I doing? Because I was pretty stressed out. That it was a big ask for everybody. And making sure that I took the time, and I know I wasn't alone in this approach, to connect with my students and try to understand where they were coming from, and to give them a voice. As I made changes to my assignments, I asked them, well, did that work? And they were really very honest with me and said, well, no, that didn't work. Like, okay, let's find a new way. And so that partnership came into us finding a pathway forward through the semester to finish and to learn, because I think that we all in my classes still learned about marine science. We learned even more about each other. And I think that for me as a teacher, one of the most important lessons I learned this spring was how wonderfully diverse our students are. And I had a much better appreciation for the many different challenges that they face, significant financial and personal challenges, and the fact that they were dealing with those each day, to join my classes, to try to complete their springtime of learning at the University of Maine, on top of having to go back to work, on top of caring for their own children, on top of caring for their parents, on top of worrying about their finances. They pulled through. And my privilege became so much clearer to me, and also my responsibility to reach out to my students wherever they are, to help them continue their learning that they want to achieve. We made it through this semester in my classes because we agreed from the outset on a principle to be kind and to try to care for each other. And that's what we have to continue to do, whether we're face-to-face or in any one of the very different kinds of learning environments that we may be using in the future.
Thank you so much, Sara. So much more to talk about now as we think about what teaching and learning look like, and how much we were able to come to grow our own understandings of teaching and learning over these past few weeks. In particular, this concept of understanding where students are coming from seems to have a fundamental feeling now. And thank you so much for your comments. Next, I'm going to introduce Marcus Librizzi, who is at the University of Maine at Machias, where he is a professor of English. And this semester, Marcus won the Frederic A. Reynolds Award. This is an award that comes about through a vote of the senior class, as I understand it. It recognizes a professor's commitment and dedication to students at the University of Maine at Machias. So Marcus, congratulations, and let us hear a little bit about your thinking at this stage.
Thank you very much, Joan. It was an honor to receive the award, and it's an honor to be in this distinguished company. One thing that came in very loud and clear this spring was re-envisioning the role of an instructor, moving away from the idea of gatekeeper to the idea of mentor and guide. When I reflect back over the spring, probably my most teachable moments were giving students a second chance. You can get that assignment in. You can revise that paper. We can do it. It was that type of energy, and I began to think of myself more like I'm taking people on a journey, and what is wrong with stopping along the way to call them back, to give them a chance to catch up. And what I found, I guess, was that this actually raises the bar on accountability, because you're not off the hook. There's a limit to it, but you have the opportunity to get that assignment and you have a chance to finish that work. And it's not just that one-shot deal. So that was one of the big things that really that came across to me loud and clear. The other thing I found is I transitioned classes from on-site to online was just the golden rule of simplicity, to avoid the temptation to try to do too much. Students were very stressed, easily overwhelmed, and I found that there was a lot to be learned into doing more with less and drilling down deeper, unpacking further, than having too many different assignment categories. And I found it was easier to keep them on track with a more lean design, and that's something I want to try to balance as I move forward in terms of my fall course design as well. So I think that, I guess to paraphrase Winston Churchill, in every crisis there is an opportunity, and I think in this crisis the opportunity is to humanize our teaching and to grow in terms of instructional design. And I liked the message on partnering and the message on the morals and the ethics that came across with the two people who preceded me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. I think this concept of focusing and being able to really decide what your learning outcomes are that you intend for students seems to be an important piece of thinking about teaching in the future for all of us, perhaps. Thank you. So next I'd like to introduce Jean McRae. Where's Jean? Okay, there you are. Jean is an associate professor of environmental engineering at the University of Maine, and this year she is the winner of the Presidential Public Service Achievement Award, which is, it's a real pleasure to be able to congratulate you on this equally important part of our mission here at the university, which is public service, public engagement. And many glowing things, of course, in the nomination papers, but I wanted to pick out this line, which I thought was really significant. The person speaking of Eugene said, she has global impact and local impact of equal value at the same time. And of course, the context is of equal outstanding value. So with that, congratulations, Jean, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks very much. I'm really happy to be here, and I feel very grateful to be in this really excellent company and to hear so many ideas that really connect to the kind of work that I think my colleagues nominated me for, which is I'm the faculty advisor for Engineers Without Borders, which is a service organization that I've been working with for about 15 years now. And it's an organization that works with developing communities and to help them develop a sustainable infrastructure that they can keep up and own over time. And doing this with sort of ill-qualified student engineers is a bit of a challenge. Our student members are passionate and involved, and they really want to make a difference. But as we all learn as we get older, the solutions are not as simple as we at first think. And what Doug said at the beginning really struck me as highly relevant to the major takeaway of Engineers Without Borders to the students who are members, is that every decision, all the engineering that we do is in a human context. And that context requires an attention to what a society wants and needs. It requires an attention to justice to make sure that everybody has access and fair and equal access to the infrastructures and the systems that we build. And as engineers, we either condemn societies or enable them to move in a positive or a negative direction. I think I got that one backwards. But the really important thing is to understand that it's all toward a bigger goal. It's not just solving a problem on a sheet of paper, which is what is much easier to teach in class. And what the students really get out of their extracurricular activities and their opportunities to work together on bigger projects is that it's much bigger than that. And it takes a lot of introspection, a lot of thought and care to do this sort of work right. And so I really appreciate my colleagues across the university that provide different ways of looking at the world and different ways of understanding things so that we can move together as a society to make this a better world for all of us. Trying to do that remotely over the last few months and into the future has been challenging in that so much of the learning is a chance remark that you hear, which is really hard to make happen over venue like Zoom, where you are trying to be polite and go one at a time so that people can be heard. So it's hard to really navigate this new world and give the sort of messy opportunities for people to understand things in a new way. So it's been a challenging time. I really look forward to the times when we can get back together again and be more human and less machine. I really appreciate the recognition, and I wish I could bring all the students along who've helped me grow as a person as well, in enabling these things to happen and working on these meaningful projects.
Thank you so much, Jean, and congratulations to you as well. I think your early point about the notion that we recognize what students' passions are and then try to help them find a way to enact them. Another important piece of meeting students where they are. Next, I'd like to introduce Bob Steneck, who is a professor of marine sciences. You might have guessed that or something close to that from his background, which looks great. And Bob this year is the winner of the Presidential Research and Creative Achievement Award. So congratulations. Again, wonderful comments in all of the materials and the nomination papers. But a couple of things that I wanted to pull out. Bob is the most cited scientist in the University of Maine system, according to his nominators. That's very impressive. And there are lots of wonderful descriptions of the science that he does and the breadth of it, the fact that he draws on historical context. But someone summarized that by saying, quote, so many extraordinary and novel contributions to an astonishingly broad array of research areas. So, so Bob, congratulations to you, and we'd love to hear your comments.
Well, thank you for your kind words. And you know, in terms of accomplishments and citations, they actually build up over time, and I'm just very old. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm a marine ecologist, and my laboratories are really underwater and out of sight for most people. But in Maine, I study lobsters, coastal ecosystems, kelp forests. In the tropics, I study coral reefs. And my research has been given me a background that I can use to sort of explain how our planet is changing in so fundamental ways. And locally, we of course are seeing it in terms of as water temperatures warm. What my current research is looking at how lobster distribution and habitat use is changing. This has profound implications, but the challenges that we now face, and we are all facing, unprecedented challenges, is, how do you get the research done, and then how do you get teaching done in this environment? To a large degree right now, a lot of my research is on hold. This semester, I was supposed to work in French Polynesia and Belize. Those are both postponed. My summer work on lobsters is also postponed to a degree. And in some cases, assuming we can get back to sort of a more normal relationship with the field and people, there are some advantages because as time goes on, you can actually see change better. But one of my big challenges is that I've been a very big proponent of experiential learning. Part of the Semester by the Sea, students go out to the field, and together we look at the world, and I don't know what I'm going to see at any time. Now, the challenge going forward is how I can do this better in a remote sort of way. I'm hoping at the end of the day, I can light a flame under enough students that they can find themselves on a coast someplace and do their explorations on their own. They've got the tools to unpack that and start seeing the bigger picture. And, there are a lot of advantages to where we are that sort of slip under the rug. I mean, carbon emissions are lower than they've been in years in terms of the overall rates because of everybody sheltering it in place. This is a rare opportunity. We may actually be able to start doing things profoundly differently. You certainly hear about a lot of businesses are talking about maybe we're going to have more people working at home even when we don't have to shelter in place. And where I'm going with this is that we really have to do things to curb climate change, and this could be a net positive step in the right direction. How we go forward is a challenge, but hopefully with the right education, we're going to be able to make the right choices.
Great, thank you. I'm struck by your comment about we may need to think about or have the opportunity to think about doing things profoundly differently. So we'll come back to that idea for everybody when we finish. But next, let's hear from our sixth award winner in this call, Rich Powell. Rich is a professor of political science, and he is the winner of the Distinguished Maine Professor Award this year. In their nomination letters, Rich's colleagues and former students describe him as an innovative, gifted, and empowering teacher who maximizes student success and celebrates learning, a prolific researcher regularly tapped for his expertise by local and national media, and an engaged community member committed to public service. And I'll turn to Rich to tell you a little bit about, to tell us all a bit about his work and his activity in the Cohen Institute particularly, which he directs. But I want to thank Rich because didn't get to do this quite a while ago when we were doing an early webinar or an early session like this at the very beginnings of the pandemic. We asked Rich what advice he would give to the faculty who were figuring out how to make their shift. And he basically said, don't try to do everything. Keep it quite simple. Stay focused. And I think we're hearing from people here that focus and being clear about what you want is important. So anyhow, Rich, thank you. Congratulations. And we'd like to hear a few words.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to join this panel. This will be my 20th year this fall at the University of Maine. And when you start measuring your time of service in decades, you start to feel like you've been around for a while. But I'm humbled to hear that I have 3 more years to go before I get halfway to Doug Allen's time at the University of Maine. So it's actually inspiring to see people spend so much of their life's effort in one place, and hopefully, God willing, I'll be around to contribute many, many more years as Doug and the others on this panel have done. So I've over the course of the past few months had a chance to talk about the University of Maine with a lot of different audiences. And one of the things that I really like to note is that, we have a wonderful system of higher education here in the United States. And there are schools that are really superb teaching schools. And there are universities that are really superb research universities. And there are also schools that do a wonderful job of public service and serving their states and local communities. And I feel just so fortunate to be at the University of Maine because it's very rare that I think you can be at a place that truly values and excels in all three areas. At the University of Maine, you really have the flexibility as a faculty member to excel as a teacher, to excel as a researcher, and know that you're contributing to the state and to the citizens who are helping to support your endeavors as well. So this has been just a wonderful home for me for these past number of years, and hopefully for many more years to come. As you mentioned, President Ferrini-Mundy, I'm a political scientist by training, and my research tends to be on things like presidential leadership and presidents in their relationship with Congress, and our aspects of our electoral system at the state and national level, and so on. But one of my major endeavors in recent years has been as serving as the founding director of the William S. Cohen Institute for Leadership and Public Service here at the University of Maine. And we are in about our 7th year or so of existence. And this spring really hit home, I think, some of the major reasons why we created the Institute going back into the early part of this past decade. We really recognized, as some others have alluded to, that we need to really do a good job, a much better job of training future generations of leaders to be effective, but also to be ethical and visionary. And I think the current crisis that we've gone through really kind of highlights some of the aspects of that that are so critical. We face so many different challenges in this, and some of them have been technical, and a university like the University of Maine has so much to offer in terms of solving some of those technical challenges, but we also have much to offer in terms of how the leadership approach is integrated in these times of challenge. Just to kind of throw out an example here, we have seen that in the United States and worldwide, we're really blessed with some spectacular public health experts, and are able to come up with such creative and important solutions for the challenges that we faced. On the other hand, we also see that we have obviously some pretty severe economic and social challenges, and the job of a leader is to figure out how to integrate those and how to balance those. I think we'd probably spent less time thinking about that. We'd spent some time thinking about, in terms of our public health system, how we would deal with a crisis like this. But I think balancing those and engaging in thoughtful, ethical decision-making about how the health crisis gets balanced with the social and political and economic crises that we're all facing has been really critical. So that's the type of work that we're doing with our students and over at the Cohen Institute and our Leadership Studies program here at the University of Maine, where we're really working with people on how to work in a social setting with others and how to lead in a way that's effective, but also help develop leaders that have a broader perspective in terms of ethical decision-making and ethical leadership of others.
Thank you, Rich. Very interesting, very provocative too, in that the Cohen Institute has a particular mission and scope, but I would like to propose we can imagine broadening our thinking a bit to say the university fully, and I think you said this actually, is about preparing leaders in various ways, in some parts of the university with much more intentionality, but with the recognition that any of our students should leave us at some level prepared to lead in some way, locally or broadly, beyond that. And so I'm going to just have time, I think, to pose one question and give everybody a chance to use it to say what they'd like to be sure to leave us with. And that is this: all of you have mentioned in one way or another how the past several weeks have caused you to rethink, to understand something differently, to interact with your students in new ways. Something about you has changed, or has been expanded, or has been sharply focused over the last several weeks as we've all experienced this together. So you're thinking about things differently. And someone else, I think it was Bob, who talked about maybe going forward, we could be thinking about our world profoundly differently. So let's narrow that to that we can think about higher education profoundly differently. So the question is this: based on what you've learned, what you've experienced, what you've come to understand in new ways over the last few weeks for your work, what do you predict or think we should work on that would result in the kinds of profound differences that are needed in higher ed in the context that we now face? So it's meant to be open-ended enough to give you plenty of space. And we'll just go through the same order and let everyone have sort of their last couple of minutes. And we'll begin therefore with Doug.
Okay. I am in, I think, a different position because I've been on phased retirement. The last teaching I did, fortunately, ended in December. So I didn't have to make these adjustments in my teaching or relating to students. But Joan's question raises, and I could relate it to the modern, what I consider the modern lynching and execution of George Floyd, and what that reveals. Namely, in my own work on all levels, I talk about the need for a qualitative paradigm shift. If we're going to deal with the crises of violence, of hatred, of economic inequality, of environmental unsustainability. And so I think that what has occurred here is it kind of the killing of George Floyd. There's nothing new about this, but what it revealed and what it touched was, on the one hand, among, say, Blacks in this case, 400 years of the pandemic of systemic racism and that trauma of starting with the millions of people being put on slave ships and dying and being thrown into the ocean, unnamed people, unrecorded people, and then the whole history of slavery and that trauma that's inherited, about that, about how people are dehumanized and raped and lynched and removed from families, and the whole history of that to the present. And so we see this was a spark, this killing that really touched into, exposed that pandemic of things, basic root causes and systemic structures that we often don't address, but must address. And it kind of, to me, it keyed in with the pandemic of the white supremacy, the violence, the hatred that's being spewed every day from Washington and by so many others in our country and the world, which is another kind of virus that infects all of us and that is relevant to what happened. And of course, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, that brings out, that exposes the kind of basic root causes and systemic structures of who is suffering the most, right? The poor, people of color, Blacks, Indigenous people, and it really exposes what's often ignored about basic opportunity, access to education, to food, to water, to housing, to decent employment, and the people who most have been suffering. And it kind of gives us, as was said, the opportunity now. How was the need for kind of qualitative structural change in terms of how we address these issues at the University of Maine and throughout the world in the coming years?
Thank you. Thank you. Qualitative paradigm shift is compelling language for sure. Thank you for that. Sara, your thoughts?
I think that one of the ways that we work towards that shift is to renew our commitment to a focus on student-centered teaching and supporting our students in their learning pathways, whether those are through research or in our classrooms. We know from educational research that student-centered approaches to teaching lead to more powerful learning and often stronger and better outcomes for our students in our classrooms. And so I think that as we go about moving towards that shift and changing our approach to accommodate to the new normal we find ourselves in, or even the new abnormal that we wish we weren't in, we need to make certain that as we make those changes, we support students by listening to their voices and supporting their own agency and giving our students agency, making sure that we do include them in our discussions of what is the best way to continue to learn. It's not just all about us and what we think.
Thank you. Thank you, Sara. Marcus.
My feelings are that that adaptation is the key for the species, for the society, for the institution, and that we have to keep evolving and adapting. And I don't see us going ever back to what it was before. I see a fluidity that we used to have online classes and then live classes and maybe some of both. I think that there's going to be much more fluidity and a need to tap into way more different diverse modes of connecting with students, so that you may be chatting with them live, you may have synchronous moments, you may be sending them a video, you may be sending them a little audio file rather than just comments on it. And I think that when we go back to something ideally more safe and as well, I don't think it will be what it is before. I think that we have to adapt and grow and become stronger and better in our modes of delivery and in our humanity too.
Thank you. Thank you. Jean.
Well, I guess I agree that we're not at a time where we can do anything other than adapt and grow and develop in response to this situation. And it's an opportunity to adapt and build better systems. We know that the systems that we live under now are flawed, and that there's better ways to do things and more comprehensive and thoughtful ways to get things done. You know, we all have to live within some constraints, and the constraints that we face in the near future are going to be a little bit different, I hope, than the longer term constraints. But in the process of trying out all these things, maybe we'll come up with a more effective method of bringing together all these disparate parts, because the challenges we face in the future are truly transdisciplinary. They require a holistic way of approaching things. And one of the really important things about an institution like ours is it has it all. I mean, it's got the technical stuff. It's got a lot of significant outreach, like cooperative extension, provides avenues for us to meet with people that you wouldn't necessarily meet at every type of university. We have students from the undergraduate level through advanced degrees and postdocs and all sorts of experts on all sorts of things. And we all have this great opportunity to be together and learn from each other. So, you know, hopefully we'll all find pathways through this that we can bring together in a way that really capitalizes on those strengths, so that we can continue to face the big challenges that are ahead.
Thank you very much. Bob?
You know, there's not much I can add to the wonderful words that we've already heard, but I'd like to just simply say that clearly the pandemic has upended our world, but planet Earth still needs our help, and perhaps more now than ever. But, you know, there's really much to do, and now is the best time to find a creative and new ways to do it. And I'd say that I think the pandemic has taught us all that we can be agile, we can adapt, and we have to use those new tools and skills moving forward in this uncertain world.
Thank you. And Rich, this will conclude our session with your comments.
I think what perhaps the most important contribution that a university can make to society is to model the generation of knowledge and collective solutions to collective problems among people with very diverse perspectives. And as a political scientist, you know, I'm alarmed, frankly, in recent decades by our decaying ability to have those sorts of civil, collaborative discussions without denigrating other people, without it turning into partisan warfare. In the state of Maine here, we have really been blessed over the last number of decades with some of the leaders in our nation who I think are perhaps among the best at modeling this sort of, you know, collaborative decision making across party lines, serious, independent thought, and we really need to bring that message to the external world. I know it's an uphill fight, and I at first, when this coronavirus crisis arose, I held out hope that perhaps it would give us some opportunities to start to bridge some of those differences. Unfortunately, this has become politicized in a way that I think has been unfortunate as well. But I do really believe that as we model what we do on a university campus, as we pursue knowledge amongst ourselves, as we show respect for one another, as we can really show students how to go forward and show the broader world how to go forward, and to really find a way to seek data-driven solutions, but that also keep that common civic notion in mind as well.
Thank you all. I hope everyone watching can see and recognize why all of these award winners were so deserving in receiving these awards. What a fascinating conversation. I wish we could take more time. Maybe we'll find a way to do so, because across all the disciplines represented here, which pretty well span our range, there's a commonality of insight, commonality of sort of sense of where we need to go and how we need to think about it. So I thank you all. Really appreciate your participation. Hope everyone enjoys their evening, and congratulations again. Thank you.